Okay, today we're going to go through just a really quick demonstration of a robin. I haven't decided exactly what brushes and paints I'm going to use yet, so we'll get to that as we go. But for the reference photo, I'm using one from Pixabay. If you search robin on Pixabay, it's on about page 3, and the photographer is Marigard. Okay, so in terms of paper, I'm actually using 640 gram Arches cold press today. I tend to use mostly 640 gram. I don't actually have any 300 gram lying around at the moment, but 300 gram is perfectly fine. I tend to use the 640 gram largely because it holds the water for longer, so you get a little bit more time to play, and the paper doesn't buckle like the 300 gram does, and I don't like pre-stretching my paper, so for me it works out well. It is, however, twice the price of the 300 gram, and you'll get a beautiful result on the 300 gram anyway, so don't feel you need to go out and buy heavier paper. Now, you can use, of course, your favourite paper. I would say with paper, try and use a good quality brand. If you go for a cheaper paper, you'll probably just get frustrated and decide that you don't really like watercolour. Now, I've just done a really quick sketch. I haven't put in all these details of the feathers or anything like that. I've just given myself a basic outline with a HB pencil. I've drawn it probably a little bit darker than I would normally, just so that you can see. Try and keep the pencil lines fairly light because it can be hard to get them off underneath the paint. Okay, I'm going to start painting, and I'm going to start in the beak, and I'm going to pick a small synthetic brush. Now, I'd actually probably rather use this one, but I've trashed this one and the tip isn't very good on that. So although this little synthetic is bigger, it's got a nicer tip on it. So I'm going to use that to go into the beak. And I'm going to use some Daniel Smith Indigo for the beak. So I'm going to make myself up in my palette just a little puddle of really milky indigo. So quite a lot of water in there. I want to keep this first wash light. I'm going to take off the excess so that I've not got too much water on my brush. I'm going to start in the middle of the beak, that's too much water, and push out to the edge. I find that if I start on the edge, I often make the shape bigger than I intended. And I'm just going to keep it weaker on the top of the beak there. So I've just grabbed a bit more water, because this is really just about getting the shape of the beak right. My pencil lines are a bit messy, so it's a little bit hard to see. Because if you do, with a bird, if you don't get the beak right, it doesn't matter how good the rest of the painting is, it won't be convincing. Right, so it's a lot lighter than it needs to be, but I'm happy with that shape. I'll just let that dry. While I've got the indigo out, I'm going to go slightly thicker paint, so creamier paint, and paint in the eye. Still with that same small synthetic. Okay, so yeah, you can see that this was actually from the same well, but I've got a lot less water on my brush for that. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of that indigo in a different pot of water because I don't want to make my water really dirty. So what am I going to use? I've got this is a Neef 4750 LP size 8. It holds a lot of paint and a lot of water, and it comes to a really nice point. So I'm going to start in the chest, and what I want is a really nice soft feel. So to get that, I'm going to actually paint with water first. I'm going to grab my burnt sienna that I'm going to use for the chest. And I use Winsor & Newton burnt sienna. So I'm just going to squeeze a bit of that out. Okay. Make sure my brush is clean, because I'm not very good at cleaning my brushes. Yeah. Okay, now I need to keep out of, I don't want to touch this eye because that indigo will bleed. So I'm just going to paint the middle of the chest here. I'm going to come up underneath that beak to my pencil line, kind of into that shoulder a bit. And I'll hold up the paper in a minute and show you how wet. I'm following, you know, the red chest there, like I'm staying out of the head for the moment. And I will put some water on that bit of his forehead. Okay, so I'm coming as close as I can to that eye without actually touching it. If I hold up, you can see I'm wet, but I'm not sopping. I haven't got huge pools of water. Then I'm going to pick up some burnt sienna. So I'm going to make a little puddle here. I'm initially going to go on a little less strong than I need. All right, so drop that in, and what you want to see is the paint spreading. If you don't get any movement there, you haven't got enough water, so you can just throw a bit more water on. So I'm just going to move it around. Make sure I'm coming to my pencil edge there, and the same here. Again, pushing out to the edge, not starting on the edge and coming back in. I'm going to drop a little bit into the wet page above the beak. Okay, I'm going to let that bleed in. Then what I want to do, I want a little bit of that to bleed down into the tummy. I don't want it all to just run so I've got a flat wash, and I am going to build up the strength in that burnt sienna. What I'm going to do is going to wash my brush, and I'm just going to paint a little bit in his belly and bring that up. So again, it's not soaking, just damp. And in a couple of places, I'm just going to touch to that burnt sienna. And I don't want to drag all of that colour down. Oh, and I didn't mention, actually, I forgot to mention, I'm painting flat. So I've just washed my brush again. I'm just running it along the edge because I want some bleeding, but I don't want all of that paint to rush down. Okay. While that's drying, I'm going to keep an eye on it, and I've got a few little bits of white paper there, and I'm going to put in this wing. Now for that, I'm just going to do a couple of strokes with the same brush, and I'm going to use, what have I got? I've either got Daniel Smith Van Dyke Brown or Spectrum Sepia. We'll go with the Daniel Smith Van Dyke Brown. So I'm just going to squeeze out a bit of fresh paint. Okay. And I do always keep a bit of paper near me to test out before I go onto my page if I'm not sure what intensity I want. Okay, so I'm dry in the wing and then I'm wet up on that shoulder. So I'm going to make a bit of a puddle, a bit milky to creamy, not too wussy. All right, we'll have a look. It's not too bad. Okay, then I'm not going to overthink it, and I'm going to just put a couple of strokes. Now you're going to be able to see, probably. So 1, 2, oh, didn't mean to go that high. So I'll have to fix that up. So I'm just going to wash my brush. I'm just going to back off where I meant to stop about there, and I've come into that chest. So I can fix that up if my brush is drier than the page. If I came in with a whole lot of water there, that would be bad. Now I'm just going to drop a bit more burnt sienna to cover my, not that much, it's a bit clumpy, just to cover my mistake there. Because I know that I've got darts and things to go in there, so you won't be able to see that by the time I've finished. I'm just looking at this chink that I've got here. I might tidy that up. So I'm just grabbing a bit of thick paint while that's wet and just tidying that line up. And then I might start to suggest, so there's this gap between the wing and the back here. And I think what I might do is grab, while I've got a bit of water in the page, I think, a little bit. So I'm going to leave a bit of a gap. So that was my Van Dyke Brown again. I've got a bit of a gap between the wing and the back. My page is still wet. And this is where, if I was on 300 gram, I might have had to have put some more water there because it probably would have dried by now. But that's fine, you can just wet it down again. I'm just cleaning my brush. I'm just going to run my damp brush just along that dark. Now it will get, I want to go a lot darker than that, but I'm just starting to think about where my shadow might be underneath there. And while I've got that colour on my brush, I'm going to think about this side as well, because I'm going to want to round him up. So I'm going to take, I've got a little bit of water there. We'll see. So I'm just going to take some more Van Dyke Brown. So yeah, I'm still wet. If that was completely dry, just paint it down with water again. So I'm cleaning my brush, taking off the excess. Ooh, and just running it along that join. Okay. Now that will need to be a lot darker, but it starts to give me the idea of where I want to go. And while this is still damp, I might actually put this other, because I'm in my Van Dyke Brown, so to keep the same pigment, I might put this other wing in. So I need to make sure it's a similar strength to this side. So I'm just going to do, oh, where is it? It's maybe about there. And sort of when you're doing it as a one stroke, you've got to put it in, and whatever you've got, you've then got to live with it. You can't really muck with it. And if you try to change, I can tidy up here, but if you try and change the, like the tip here, you'll get fatter and bigger, and you'll just end up making a mess. So pretty much you get one go. I've still got paint on my brush. I'm going to give myself a couple of tail feathers, and all I'm going to do for that, I'm going to put my brush a bit more on the side, so up like that. So one, maybe a second one. Take the excess off my brush, and I might just tidy up the line coming up there. Now that's probably too sharp, so I'm going to clean my brush and just run some water along that. It's nice if you can get a couple of little broken lines through here. So my brush was quite dry, so it skips along the paper because I kind of had it on the side, so I get those little speckles. So I'm going to leave that. Now I'm going to stay out of that for the minute, and I'm going to come back up into the top of the head. Now here I want to keep some of the light. If I was painting this for me, I would rub off those pencil lines because they're going to be a bit obvious underneath here. But for now, I'm just going to paint this with water. Not heaps, I'm not flooding the page. And then I'm going to drop in some weak, so milky Van Dyke. And because I want it lighter at the top, I'm going to start, when I put that pigment on, I'm going to start at the back here so that if it's too heavy, I can get it off and I haven't put a whole lot of solid colour on the top. I'm just going to chase that down and just tease that over the top. Okay. I'm just picking up a bit more paint to close in the gap around the eye there. Now, while that's still wet, I'm going to drop slightly thicker paint, my Van Dyke still, just in the back here. And now, if I've got too much water on my brush when I do that, it will just run through and make one flat wash. It won't do anything very interesting. So just not too wet. Okay, I'm starting to fiddle in there, so I need to come out of that for a minute. Now in the beak, it's kind of hard to see, you know, there are lots of feathering, lots of shadows underneath here, so I'm gonna just drop in some darks in here now. So I might switch to my smaller brush. And I think what I'll do, I might put indigo here and then transition into the Van Dyke Brown underneath. So I'm going onto dry paper with the indigo. I'm going to leave it lighter on the top of the beak. Then I'm going to come down and touch where I meet the burnt sienna. From here, I'm going to grab a bit of Van Dyke and come and touch. So the burnt sienna is dry, that indigo is obviously wet. And I'm just going to tease that down a bit because I want to try and get my eye in to where that shadow, you know, how much light I'm going to leave. I'm just taking the excess off my brush and blending it to the wash underneath. So And with these sort of darks, I would rather build up to it, you know, go 3 times, 4 times and layer it, than go too heavy initially and not be able to get it off. Because once you've got it on there, it's tricky it's a pain to lift if you've gone too dark. Right, so that's not quite it, but that's a start. And I might still, while I'm in there, strengthen up a bit more indigo. I think it might be dry. Yeah, that's dry there. So I'm just gonna. I don't want a really solid join. Oh, it's got a little bit of water in it still. But so my brush has to be. Again, I don't want to introduce a whole lot of water. My brush needs to be reasonably dry. And I'm just kind of sibbling along that join between the brown and the blue. I'm just cleaning my brush, taking off the water, and just softening that edge back into my burnt sienna. All right. Now, I've lifted some paint here. My burnt sienna's a little bit of a spot, but I'll come back to that when that's all dry. So because things are starting to lift in there, I need to come out and let that dry. I'm going to come around the eye here and with a bit more burnt sienna. So I've got pretty thick burnt sienna in there, not a lot of water. I'm just going to tidy up around the eye. And I've got that little ring there because I didn't want to make the indigo bleed. And you can leave a little bit of a white line around. Just don't let the don't have the white line the entire way around, or it will look a little bit cartoonish. If you don't have a white line and you want one, you can put one in later with gouache. Again, just blending it. And while that's still damp, I'm going to drop just a touch of my Van Dyke Brown in here. So the page is still damp. That burnt sienna's still got a little bit of moisture in it. Washing my brush and just softening that back in. Wash my brush again, because I just want to suggest that bit of a dark in there without going overboard. Now I'm just backing off that. I've just dragged that brown over that. I had a really big white line in the beak here that was too much, so I've just backed that off for now. I'll come back to that later. Now I'm drying here. Okay, so I've just rubbed off most of the pencil lines just down the bottom here, just because sometimes it can be hard to see. You can't tell if it's paint or pencil. I can see I've got a little divot there, a little bump. You might not be able to see it in the video. I'm just going to take a scalpel blade on the flat, and I'm just going to take off, just straighten that up a little bit. So you have to be careful with a blade that you don't damage the paper, but you can, particularly with arches, I find you can take off little bits like that without getting into strife. It's easier than trying to get it off with water. Okay, I need to fatten him up. So I'm staying out of here for now because I'm all a bit gammy in there. So I'm going to come back down in here and take, I might use both brushes. I'm going to start with my small synthetic, and I'm just going to paint. No, that's rubbish. Okay, I'm going to start with my bigger brush, painting with clean water underneath that wing, back along the tummy line again. Now, when you're doing this, when we're adding another layer, make sure you come all the way to the edge of the first wash, because I'm going to put more pigment on. If I've got a line, if I haven't wet all the way to the edge, you'll get a white gap then you wash, so it will look a bit odd. So my brush is a little bit dirty, but that's okay. So I'm just going to clean it again, and I'm just softening it along. So I'm dampening down further than I'm going to actually want to paint. So I've got water in here, but really I'm just dropping pigment in the sides there. So I'm going to take some more. Actually, this time I'm going to take a little bit of my Van Dyke and a little bit of my indigo. So a little bit of brown and a little bit of blue. I'm just going to come in underneath that wing again and on that tummy. Wash my brush and just soften. So I want to, I don't want a harsh line between the white here and the dark. So I've got to keep washing my brush, taking off the excess, and just running my damp brush along the edge and keeping an eye on all those wet edges to see what's happening. And I think I've got this white under here that then doesn't make sense, so I'm going to drop some more pigment in there. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of brown. I think I picked up more brown than blue then in my indigo. I'm just going to drag that through. So wash my brush. Now when I'm taking, every time I wash my brush and I'm coming back in, I'm taking off the excess moisture on the tissue because I don't want to introduce a whole lot more water. Okay, it's still not strong enough, but I want to keep out of that for now. I've got a few hard lines there, but I don't mind them that much. I think I might leave them as is. And then I'm going to come, I think I might come back into underneath the beak. So I'm going to go back to small synthetic. This still really isn't not anywhere near dark enough in here. So I'm going to come on again, got my indigo, which is still, you know, it's fine because I would rather have to keep layering it than be too dark right off the bat. Okay, so I'm probably going to have to lighten that, darken, the top of that beak as well. But to start with, I'm staying underneath, just having a look. And then switching to a bit of brown under here. And I might also drop, so that's my Van Dyke. And I'm going to drop a bit of burnt sienna as well, just because because I keep going back in here, I'm lifting my wash a bit. That was a bit much, so wash my brush. So I'm just wet in wet, strengthening up that burnt sienna. So I've gone indigo, Van Dyke brown, burnt sienna, washing my brush, working it into the wash underneath. I think I'll have to soften that edge there as well. So there is a little bit of light on this side, but I don't want to leave too much and have it, I'll leave a little bit. The light I can, if I leave too much light, it's easy to fill in at the end, hard to go the other way. So I'll just leave it a bit. Okay, I'm just having a look at my reference and sort of seeing what's happening around here. I'm just teasing that burnt sienna down so that you can't see too much of a join. And what I want to be really careful to do is I don't want to lose the light here. So I'm trying to stay out of the front of the chest there because I want that to stay nice and clean. Starting to fiddle, so I can see I probably need to fill in there, but I'm mucking in there now, so I need to come out. I'm going to come into this front bit in here and think a little bit more carefully about the shape between the eye and the beak there. And actually something that I didn't say that I tend to say is that you will notice this doesn't look exactly like the reference, and that's okay because the reference is just a guide, and I'm not trying to paint photographically. I'm not trying to paint exactly like the reference. I'm just trying to get the idea, so I don't need to get hung up whether it looks exactly like the reference or not. No one's going to have the reference next to the painting. Okay, just trying to see what's happening up there. So I've got a pencil line there that's a little bit annoying, but I'll wait until that's dry before I take that out. So that was just all straight burnt sienna. And then I'm going to drop again, while it's damp, just a little bit of that Van Dyke. So just working up to my darks. All right. So I've just washed my brush and softening in that edge. Okay, I think I'm going to strengthen up the dark here. So now I'm going on to, it's dry there. I'm with my small synthetic. I'm just picking up some Van Dyke, putting it on. So that's dry paper, pretty thick paint, washing my brush. Then I'm going to tease that edge down. So I've introduced water there because now I want to get a transition from that dark. So I'm not picking up more pigment off my palette. I'm using what I just put on the page. So now I'm painting above my wet edge here and then coming down to meet it. And that pigment will dilute now. So I keep the stronger bit in the center there. And then I'll just tease that up. Okay, and as soon as you find that the pigment's starting to lift, get out, because you can come back and add more, but you'll start to lift washes and it will make you unhappy. Okay. All a bit wet, not finished in there, but all a bit wet, so I need to come out of there. I'm gonna, maybe it'll be the last time, we'll see how we go. I wanna restate, these are still too light, particularly under here. So I'm going to go back to my bigger brush, clean it, get some water, do the same thing, paint underneath that wing. So I'm painting further than I want, painting with water further than I want the pigment to go. Bit on this side still. So I'm fully dried down here now. So I'm going to make sure I retain the white in the tummy. Bit of my blue, bit of my brown. So my Van Dyke and my indigo, not so much blue. And drop that in. A bit more on this side. Want nice soft shadows. Wash my brush. Walk it along that wet edge. Both sides. So I'm just teasing it around to where I actually want it to go. And then I'll drop more pigment, stronger pigment, so less water, into the edge underneath the wing. So just softening back, keeping an eye on what it's doing, watching for edges that are forming that I don't want, and pushing them back. And again, you'll have with the, you can, will work fine with the 300 doing this. You just have to work a little more quickly with the 300 gram paper. Well, I find anyway. Then I'm going to come back with really, so if I look in my well here, I'm going to get thicker paint now, not much water in there at all. And a bit of the blue, a bit of the indigo. And just really drop that in, wash my brush, and it looks quite dark, but you've got to remember this, it will dry lighter. So now I've got less water on my brush than my page, and I'll tease that through. And if you put it on and it genuinely is too dark, you can just flood it with water and dilute it that way and keep wicking it off with your brush. Don't need to dab at it, you can just put more water on and get it off that way calmly. I think that's when it's when you panic that you get into strife. If you give yourself a second and think about it, you can usually rescue. It's not quite as unforgiving as people would have you believe. So this is really just practice at getting those really soft blends. They're a little bit tedious, but they're a nice tool to have in your kit. All right, definitely starting to fiddle. May or may not need another go under there, but I will come out of that and wait. So I'm annoyed at myself for not taking these pencil lines off because I'm not going to be able to get rid of those. So I might pop a bit of burnt sienna on there. So I'm just going to take a little brush, put a bit of water in there, and just see if I can make those a little less obvious. And just worry my brush over that a bit. And yeah, if I can try and get those off with a razor, but I'll just end up lifting the wash. Okay, so I'm just going to walk that back up. It's a little bit better. Okay. Again, I'm still not dark enough underneath here. I might put some brown on this time, so I'm going to take some Van Dyke and come under here. Wash my brush, take the excess off my brush, wash my brush, clean it, and just soften that brown into what's already underneath the beak there. And I need to put probably a wash of, I might stick with the indigo, milky indigo, over the top because it's a little bit hard to see the shape of the beak there. So I've just come on with really dilute indigo. I've still got a bit of pencil there actually, it's a little bit messy. Probably would be better with a finer brush. I actually don't have many little brushes because I don't ever paint this. I very rarely paint this small. Okay, and I'm going to strengthen up again in here. So now going on to dry, I'm taking a mix of my burnt sienna and my Van Dyke brown because I've been in there a few times and it hasn't stuck. It hasn't stayed dark enough. So this time I'm going to mean it and go straight on to dry paper. Looks like I've got a little bit of water still in there. That's okay. So I'll dry my brush and tease it around. So I'm always just trying to soften it back into the wash underneath. I don't really like that white there. I might close that in. Maybe a bit more, a bit darker again. Just keeps, I know I keep going back and back and back, but if you don't get your darks dark enough, you'll have a pretty insipid painting. Like you really do need to make sure that you've got a few good darks. Okay. I might strengthen. I'm going on to dry paper again. Van Dyke. Just going to make that a bit darker. So I'm all dry through here. So I put some on, then I'm drying my brush, painting a tissue so I can easily blend it. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to see, sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to take this is a Neef Bright Stiff Synthetic. It's possibly a little bit big for this painting, but we'll give it a go. I'm just going to put my brush in water, take off the excess. I'm going to come underneath the eye and I'm just going to lift a little bit. So I'm pushing pretty hard on the paper. And I've got to keep washing my brush or I'll just push pigment around. And I just want to see, sometimes it makes it a bit more interesting, sometimes it doesn't help. Just lifting a little bit of a highlight underneath the eye there, and then I've got to soften, got a really hard line there. But when you do this, really all you've got to pay attention to is that you keep washing your brush and taking off the pigment, otherwise you just end up with a big mess of pigment pushed around your page. So you've got to keep washing the brush, taking off the water, making sure it's clean, and you're kind of chasing that wet edge down. And if it doesn't help, you can go in and fill it back in again. I can see I've got a bit of a gap. I haven't come all the way out on my beak. I'm just going to grab a bit of my blue and a bit of my brown again, and I've just got a little bit of a light on the edge. I haven't quite come all the way out. Let's tidy that up. And I still think I probably need a bit more indigo. I'm going to come underneath where the feathers meet the beak there, put a bit more indigo, keep light on the very top of the beak, on the point. I've got some pencil there that I need to get rid of. And then I'm going to pick up a really thick indigo, and just along that join, just drop a little bit more paint. Okay, and I'm still not dark enough in here. Little bit of Van Dyke, little bit of, so hardly any water, really toothpastey paint. And I'm careful, I took all that effort to put that highlight, so I don't want to cover that in. But I'm all dry here, just touching onto the dry paper and just strengthening up that little dark. Wash my brush, just smooth that in a bit. Now, this is one of those things, not enough colour. So I reckon I'm going to keep all this light in here. I want to strengthen up my red, my burnt sienna, just a touch more. So I'm not going to go crazy, and I'm going to stay out of this light, but I'm just going to pop a bit of water down here, just roughly up here, so I'm sort of in a U shape under here. And then I'm going to pick up a bit more burnt sienna, not much water in the paint, and just chuck that on. Wash my brush. Just, my colour got a little bit weak. If I've got a hard edge, I'm just going to run my damp brush along it. Okay, I possibly, I'm just trying to decide whether I want, this is a little bit tidy, whether I want a little bit more warmth, a little bit more brown down here. I might, let's see, I might, same old, painting down. I might actually pop, I'm just going to pop a touch, let's see if it helps or hinders. I'm going to just touch a bit of burnt sienna. Just the Van Dyke's quite cool. So I don't want to overdo it, that was a bit much. So I just wash my brush and dilute that out. And actually what I might do, I might drop just a touch of, I'll put a bit of yellow ochre or raw sienna, either or, they're pretty similar, just underneath. So that's all wet down there, so I'm just going to drop that in, clean my brush, move it around a bit. I need to be careful not to close in all my white, and if it starts to get too much, here I can pop tissue on and just soften it back a bit. I just want a hint of it. Okay, now if you look, a couple of things that I need to fix. I might soften that join a little bit between, let's see if I can, between my under the beak and over the beak. I've dried my brush, and I'm just gonna run my damp brush, so I'm not trying not to introduce a whole lot of water here, just running it along that edge between the top and the bottom. You might not be able to see that on the video, but it just softens it back a bit. And something that I'm just gonna, while that's still wet, I do want to strengthen that one last time. So I'll come on with more Van Dyke while I've got some water in the page, watching the edges that it's going to form and softening any that I don't like. Tedious, I know. And you know, you can, with those darks, just wondering if I need a bit more over there. With those darks, you don't have to get them all in the first pass. You know, you can come back tomorrow and add another round. And sometimes that's better, because you really need to walk away from the painting to see what else it needs, particularly when you've been sitting at it for a while. So I'll come out of that bit. The only thing I want to do, because you can see here I've got a dark line here and a dark line here, because I had water and it's pushed out to the edge and left my pigment there. I can either try and soften a bit with a damp brush. So I'll soften that one a bit. The inside one's not really a problem. It's the outside one that's more of an issue. Because if I run a damp brush on there, I can make my shape bigger, which I don't want to do. So I could, don't really mind that now, I could run a scalpel along that edge a little bit, or I could add some more pigment and colour it in a bit more. Don't think it bothers me that much. I will tidy up. I've got a little bit here. That's all right. I'm going to put a little highlight in the eye with some white gouache if I can find it. I just use Art Spectrum white gouache because it's cheap and it's not, some of the gouache, the tubes are really big, and I only use the tiniest amount of gouache, so I don't, and it dries up, the tube goes bad before I get through it all. Now I'm getting this is a ridiculous brush because there aren't many bristles left on it. Wet it, put it straight in my tube. Now because my gouache is a little bit dry, so it's a little bit gluey. We'll see how we go. Just in the back of the eye here, I'm just going to pop a tiny bit of a highlight, so not much. And if you've gone too dark on your beak, you can use gouache. You can cheat a bit. You can get a tiny bit of gouache. So I'll go up to my slightly bigger synthetic. I'm going to take a tiny bit. You've got to remember with gouache, a little bit goes a long way, and you can't get it off once you put it on. So you've got to be sure you want to use it. So I've put my brush in my tube. I'm just going to touch it to that tissue. And what you can do is, mine isn't too dark, but if yours was too dark, you can then just run it along that top of the beak to get a highlight back in, and then clean your brush and just blend it back. So you might not be able to see that because mine was really light already, but that's if you've gone too dark. Rather than trying to lift paint in there, I would do that. So that's probably at the point where that needs to now dry completely, and then I can come back, and if I needed to do anything more, which would really probably be just making sure that these shadows are strong enough to round him up. And I'm just looking, one more thing I'll show you before I stop. My I stroked there. I didn't get many strokes in here, so I've got a really solid wing. So if you wanted to get more light into there, this might not work, but you know, this is just we're not aiming for perfection here. I just want to show you some of the things you can do. So I'm taking that bright white again. This is my 95 stiff synthetic. And I've taken all the excess off. I'm going to come onto this wing. I'm going to rub the paper, and I'm just going to, and clean the brush again. I'm just going to introduce a couple of lights. So if you're, less is more, so don't overdo it. So I think that's probably where I'll stop, because I can feel that I'm starting to muck, so I need to get out of it, come back and decide if I need to do anything else. So have a go, and I hope you're happy with the result.